I was pretty much done with dating because I figured like nobody's going to live in a tiny house with me and nobody's going to poop in a bucket with me. So I just gave up. But then I met a guy and he was like, no, I'm not going to live in the tiny house, but it's totally cool. And I actually love that you have your own stuff.
Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and this is episode 299 with Kaylee, a passionate advocate for the tiny house movement and a biology teacher with a deep interest in sustainable living. Kaylee will share the inspiring saga of her journey building her own tiny house and how it reshaped her perspective on simple ecological living. We'll dig into the challenges she faced, from zoning laws to financial hurdles, and how these experiences fueled her advocacy for tiny house legalization. Kaylee's story is not just about building a small home, but about building a life aligned with values of minimalism and sustainability. Join us as we explore the highs and lows of tiny house living and learn from Kaylee's relentless pursuit of her dreams against all odds. But before we get started, did you know that I personally send Tiny House newsletter every week on Tuesdays? It's called Tiny Tuesdays, and it's a weekly email with tiny house news, interviews, photos, and resources. It's free to subscribe, and I even share sneak peeks of things that are coming up, ask for feedback about upcoming podcast guests, and more. It's really the best place to keep a pulse on what I'm doing in the tiny house space and also stay informed of what's going on in the tiny house movement. To sign up, go to thetinyhouse.net/newsletter, where you can sign up for the Tiny Tuesdays newsletter. And of course, you can unsubscribe at any time. I will never send you spam. And if you ever don't want to receive emails, it's easy to unsubscribe. So again, that's thetinyhouse.net/newsletter. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's Tiny Tuesdays newsletter. All right, I am here with Kaylee. Kaylee is a biology teacher, passionate about the environment, who dreamed about tiny houses for over a decade. Amidst the pandemic, she dove into building science, envisioning a sustainable sanctuary custom to her unique lifestyle needs. Life redirected her after she started her build, offering a promotion in a new town where housing was scarce. Opting for land and a pre-owned tiny house, she lived off-grid illegally while she worked on her tiny house build. Financial strains led her to explore tenant arrangements until town regulators intervened. This journey ignited Kaylee's advocacy for legalizing tiny homes, championing affordable, sustainable living for all, free from restrictive zoning. Kaylee, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So, as a biology teacher, how has your understanding of environmental science and sustainability influenced your approach to tiny living?
It's been fascinating. I've been teaching environmental science for a long time. And whenever I would teach about composting, the concept of the composting toilet would always come up. And the kids would always ask me, okay, but do you poop in a bucket?
And what age do you teach?
Like,
what grade do you teach?
High school.
High school. Oh boy.
School.
Okay.
So they're not shy.
Yeah.
And of course I would say, well, no, but I would.
Yeah.
So that, like that kind of, I always kind of wanted to reconcile that part of like how I educate and versus like how I live my life. And living tiny certainly gave me that opportunity to finally be able to say, well, yes, as a matter of fact, I do.
Nice. So I know your bio kind of gives us the outline of your story, but I want to really fill it in for listeners, because I think, a lot of people out there can identify with moving to a new place, having trouble finding housing, and dreaming of a tiny house. So, can you talk about, your personal story of your two movable tiny houses on your land?
Sure. So during the pandemic, I decided, now's the time. I'm going to research, I'm going to plan, I'm going to do all of the things that I need to do.
Yeah.
And then I did it, and I found a place for me to build it and live in it in someone's backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got a new job and I couldn't turn it down. It was a promotion. It was perfect. Everything was amazing. And I said yes right away.
Okay.
And this was maybe the end of the school year, maybe like May or June.
Of like 2020?
No, it would have been 2021.
2021, okay.
And it was sort of like, okay, well, now what do I do now? I'm sort of faced with this choice. I've already purchased a trailer, but I
Yeah.
haven't built anything on it. It's not even delivered yet. So now my whole plan of like where I'm going to build it is sort of kerfuffled, where I'm going to keep it. And I was moving to a new place. So I'm like, I don't have any connections out there. How am I going to be like, hey, can I live in your backyard? Like,
Yeah.
it was just very, it was a very unsettled time. But I just decided I would explore all the possible options. At the time, my finances were pretty good. So I was like, if I have to get an apartment, and that's what I do. But I
Right.
looked and there was nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. We're not even talking about finding something in my price range. I was probably looking at the top tier price wise at the time. Anyway, so I could have afforded whatever I found, but I didn't find anything.
Mm.
So that was definitely a pretty difficult situation to be in. I've already accepted this job. I've already told my other job I'm not returning. And it was scary. So
Yeah.
I just kept looking, kept pushing forward. And I did find a pretty great lot and it was perfect. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do it. This is it. I'm going to build a house. I'm going to build a tiny. I'm going to put it on the land and I'm going to live in it. But I also thought I was a superhero. I thought I could build a house in a summer vacation
Oh
as a
boy.
teacher. Now we all know that's not how it went.
We've all done it. We've all done it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I worked on it during the summer
Mm-hmm.
and I got the floor done. I was very proud of that. But it was September and school was starting and I had the floor done. And
Yep.
so what I ended up doing was I just tent camped on the lot that I just bought
Okay.
for a month or two. And I was commuting back to where my build was and trying to work on it on the weekends.
Uh-huh.
That summer rained so much. Looking back, it's just hilarious. That summer rained so much and I had
Uh-huh.
rain damage on the trailer. And I would go
Oh.
back on the weekends and I wouldn't even be able to work on it because I would just be crying. Like I worked
Oh.
so hard and I have to redo it all because it all got wet.
Oh.
And yeah, it was and I only had the weekends and it was pretty rough. But eventually I had to face the music because it was getting cold in the tent.
Yeah.
It was getting cold in the tent. And actually at the time I didn't have a car either. I had lived for 3 years with no car and I just had a motorcycle and a
Mm-hmm.
bicycle.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm doing this whole back and forth thing in the commute and just on my motorcycle. I mean, I
Yeah.
slept in that tent during 2 hurricanes and probably rode the motorcycle to work
Oh my
those
gosh.
days too.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it was just insane.
Wow.
And yeah. But I did it and then like I said, the music came
Yeah.
and it was winter or just around the corner was winter.
Wow.
So here I am with a floor and a tent and 5 acres.
Wow.
It's just insane. I don't know what I was thinking.
How did you stay like motivated during that time? That sounds like just such a struggle and like so hard.
It was, and to be honest, I think this is the first time I'm laughing about it.
Okay,
3
that's
years
good.
later.
It's good that you can laugh about it now.
But honestly, so I don't know, have you ever seen the movie Gattaca?
I
I'm a
haven't.
biology teacher. Okay, so biology fans might know it, but it's a movie set in the future about like when people are genetically engineered, and this one guy was not. His parents had an accident, and he was not genetically engineered like everybody else. And he faced all this discrimination, and he really wanted to be an astronaut, but he couldn't just because he wasn't genetically engineered. And he sort of broke the mold, and he ran away from home, and he stole somebody's he didn't steal it, he bought it, but he's bought somebody's genetically engineered identity. And then in the end of the movie, I don't want to give it all away, but in the end of the movie, he says this line about, he's having a conversation with someone, and they ask him how he did it when he wasn't supposed to be ever able to do it or ever able to compete with people who were genetically engineered. And he basically said, I stopped turning. His words are way better. The movie's very good.
Okay.
But he said, he said that he realized that he was swimming, and he said, he just stopped turning around and going back. And the only way, at one point, the only way was forward. And at some point, you go forward, and eventually you're closer to the other side than, the instinct is to turn around and save yourself. But actually, you're probably just closer to the other side.
Wow.
And I just kind of kept running that in my head.
Wow.
The only way it was going to happen was if I refused to, save myself.
Yeah.
I really wanted to live in a tiny house. Really, really did. And that was at that point, I was like, I know I'm swimming upstream. This is not cultural. It's not legal in some cases.
Yeah.
But the only way it's going to happen is if I just keep going forward and refuse to accept any other option or any other outcome.
Wow. Okay. That's so inspiring. Thank you for sharing that. I love to hear about kind of your mindset during that time. Okay. So where we left off, you worked all summer, you got the floor done, which don't feel bad about that. That's all I got done the first summer of my tiny house build that I thought I was going to do in one summer too. Okay. So you got your floor done. Winter, you're living in a tent. Winter is coming. Got some Game of Thrones vibes. Winter is coming.
It does.
Okay. So, now let's pick the story back up.
So I bought a pre-owned tiny house at that point. I looked around, I purchased it, and it was great. I loved that house. And I lived in it pretty solidly for over a year. And then by that point, I hired somebody to finish the shell, basically, of my build.
Okay.
And while that was happening, I lived in the house that I bought, the tiny that I bought.
Yep.
And it was a great situation, but I never planned on financially investing in 2 tiny houses. I had budgeted for 1.
Right.
And 2 is a totally different story. So I'm starting to feel like the financial crunch at that point.
Yeah.
But fortunately, my build was now a shell, and I was like, it's like camping, but it's better. And I've done that before.
Yeah. Like camping with insulation.
Yeah. It didn't have that at that point. But.
Okay.
But it had walls and a roof, and if an animal brushed up against it in the night, I probably wouldn't notice. So, so I was like, I'm just going to move in to that, and maybe I'll be able to get the installation done before this winter. And that didn't happen. But anyway, so I had advertised my tiny house, seeking tenants.
Okay,
and I did find a lovely couple who wanted to rent it out. And so I invited them. We worked out a lease situation and everything, and they were great. And they lived they were building out their van. So my land was very much a construction site.
Okay. So you were building your tiny house and they were building a van.
Yep. And
wow.
I'm living in my tiny house and they're living in the other tiny house. And it was all great. And I was very happy in that situation. But then we did get a letter from the town. Basically requesting a building permit. So it was their first stop or first attempt
Uh-huh.
to sort of intervene.
Okay.
So at that point, I called them and I said, I don't understand. Everything's on wheels. Nothing is a permanent building. And I was told, you're not allowed to have stored vehicles on your land in this town. It's a
Mhm.
zoning ordinance.
Mhm.
And I'm really strapped for cash at this point.
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what? Fine. I'll just sell everything.
Wow.
My tenants were planning on so my tenants were planning on leaving anyway because they were gonna live in their van.
Okay.
So I was like, let's just call it
Call it.
done, and let's just call it. I'm just gonna sell everything.
Yep. Yep.
And so I started wrapping things up there, trying to finish the outside of my build so I could move
Mhm.
it,
Mhm.
which again, history repeats itself, was not going as fast as I had planned,
Yep. Yep.
and was not going to be completed in the summer. So the town official gave me 30 days basically to get everything off my lot.
Wow. Okay.
So I did not finish the siding. I wanted to get the siding and the roof done before I moved my build,
Yeah.
just because I didn't want anything, flying off or
Mhm. Mhm.
so that 30 days came and I wasn't ready. And I was like, well, let me just push my boundaries here.
Yeah.
And I just kept working on it, trying to get it done, trying to get it done, trying to get it done. And I never got anything else from the town official.
Huh. Okay.
And then I said, that seems a little bit weird. And then I reflected back on the conversation that I had with him. And after I said, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to sell everything. After that, he said, well, can you send me a letter to that effect? And during the call, I was like, yes. But then I hung up and I was like, I'm not giving you any official documentation of something that I may or may not do so that you can hang me with it
Right.
later.
Right.
So I never
Right.
sent him anything. Like you're going to have to like really come for me for that. Or like you're going to have to, why won't you document that? And so I always
Right.
kind of
Right.
thought that was a little bit weird because I felt like if you're an official, you want official documentation, you would do that yourself and send it to me.
Yeah.
Like, as of our conversation, you agreed to sell everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was weird, right? So I never sent him the letter and I just totally ignored it. I never heard back from him about anything. And at that point, my 30 days are up and I'm looking to see what's going on with this situation in reality. So I
Mhm.
pulled the zoning ordinances and I read them again. I read them when I bought the land and nothing popped at me.
Yeah.
So I read them again and it doesn't say anything about stored vehicles. It does if you're in a certain floodplain.
Mhm.
And I'm pretty sure I'm not where I am at. So I think he was just trying to bully me.
Hmm.
And so and here we are. I mean, it's a year later and I'm still there. So so that's my suspicions. And
Do you think that it was like, was it based on maybe like a complaint or something, and that they were just kind of doing what they had to do, kind of following up on the complaint?
it's possible, but at the same I have one neighbor there, only one,
Mhm.
and they're they're very cool. I honestly when I was tenting there, I honestly don't think they even knew that I was there. And even when I lived in the tiny house by myself and I didn't have any tenants,
Mhm.
there was one winter day where I came back from work and saw like snowmobile prints in the snow. And I'm pretty sure
Hmm.
that my neighbor or my neighbor's kids like snowmobiled through my property and still nothing. And they would have seen the houses,
Yeah.
then and never said anything. I really don't. My gut really tells me that the neighbors didn't have a problem. But there was one day where like somebody, like a friend over at the same, we were working on my motorcycle, and then my tenants came home at the same day, and I feel like maybe somebody driving by, like, saw, like, a lot of commotion there that one time.
Hmm.
Maybe it was the inspector himself who drove by at that, like, 1 30-second window where we were all there, you know, visible from the street. I don't know. We'll never know.
Yeah. So that must be so stressful because it sounds like you're still living with the, it's still there. It's still possible that the town could decide to pursue it further.
It is, but I'm not living there anymore, so even
Ah,
if they do, it's a little bit less of a risk for me. So right now,
okay.
so shortly after I moved into my build and my tenants moved into theirs, like I said, I didn't have the insulation done.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of thought I would work on it, and as it got colder, it would get warmer because it would be more insulated every day.
Yeah.
Um, but then I had already installed the heat in the build,
Mm-hmm.
and then it stopped working, and we weren't
Uh-oh.
sure why. We weren't sure if it was because it wasn't insulated enough and it just wasn't keeping up, or if it was broken, or if it was the propane
Mm.
tanks that weren't filled correctly, or whatever. We had no clue. School's very much in session. I'm very much busy, and we tried a couple things to try to get it running and keep it running. The problem is it would turn on and then it would just kick off and not restart.
Mm.
And I was like, I'm gonna try to figure it out. I'm gonna try to stick it out. I have a very pretty solid track record of sticking it out at this point. Um, but I had kind of told I have a cat, and I told myself, like, if her water freezes, we're out.
Oh.
I know. And then it happened. So there was one night we stayed there, and it was 26 degrees in the house.
Oh.
And we were there. We did have an electric blanket, but both of us were under the
Mm-hmm.
covers, and it was pretty cold. And so that was it. I called out of work the next day and packed her up, and I said, something's got to give. So I made arrangements. I brought my cat to my parents, and I made arrangements to basically sleep on my cousin's couch, who lives near me, near my job.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that was it. That was gonna be the winter. I was gonna I was gonna sleep on the
Yeah.
couch for the winter, and the cat was gonna stay with my parents for the winter, and we're gonna figure it out we'll figure it out in spring.
Yeah.
But then I met a guy, and I was pretty much done with dating at that point. But because I figured, like, nobody's gonna live in a tiny house with me, and nobody's gonna poop in a bucket with me. So
Yeah.
I just gave up. But then I met a guy, and he was like, "No, I'm not gonna live in the tiny house, but it's totally cool, and I actually love that you have your own stuff." So I was like, "I'll take that." So we started dating, and around the time the heat broke, I also got really sick, and my cousin lives with, like, 10 people in her house, and I didn't wanna get everybody sick, so I was like, "Can I just stay with you? Because if I have it, you probably have it already too." So
Wow.
I he said, "Sure, stay here," and then I pretty much never left. I pretty much moved in with him at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then a couple months later, we moved the cat from my parents to his house, and I've been living with him ever since. So, the plan was always just finish the outside of the tiny house and then move it to his backyard anyway. That's sort of like the ongoing plan. So if the
Yeah.
town does come
Yeah.
back and say something, I'm just gonna say, like, "Well, I'm still planning on moving." Or
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
just suck it up and move it before the outside's done.
Yeah.
But as a teacher, I'm not working on it at all during the school year. I have
During this
no
time.
time. Yeah, so it's,
Yeah.
we tarped it up in the fall, and, school's out in 5 weeks. I'm gonna go back to it, and it's gonna be exactly the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, hopefully I'll get the outside done this summer, but whatever doesn't get done by September
Yeah.
doesn't get done.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at, and technically tiny houses aren't legal where he lives either,
Hmm.
but it would just be basically at that point. I mean, it really is just a vehicle. Nobody's living it, you know,
Right.
and
Right.
nobody would live in it. I'm not going to live in it in his backyard. I mean, I
Right. Right.
but a lot of this journey for me has been, about, the freedom to like live however I want,
Yep.
even if other people think it's crazy. Yeah, the 2 times I slept in the tent through the hurricane were terrifying,
Yeah.
but the rest of the time, I loved it. Those are some of my favorite days,
Nice.
and it was very freeing for me to, like, go from work back to the tent and have literally nothing to do. Like, there were no dishes to
Yeah.
wash because there was no sink and there were no dishes. There was nothing to sweep because there was nowhere to sweep.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just, there was nothing. I just went there
Wow.
and I didn't have anything to do. There's no domestic stress whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's exactly why I wanted to go tiny. I put a lot into my job teaching, and I don't wanna have to have domestic stress.
Yeah.
I don't care for that.
So this whole experience sounds like it got you interested and kind of seeing the need for change at a broader level, and you've since gotten involved in that process. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So I've been working to pass Bill S-897 in Massachusetts,
Hmm.
along with many other wonderful tiny house people in the community,
Hmm.
among them Vera Struck, who you've interviewed, and Dan Fitzpatrick, you've
Hmm.
interviewed also.
Hmm.
And it's been very eye-opening as to like how the legislative process works and what's really going on down at that state house has been
Yeah.
it's been very eye-opening, and I'm very glad to have had that experience. And I'm also working with the city of Holyoke. I call into their planning board meetings every day or every meeting, and because they're
Yeah.
also working on a local tiny house ordinance. So I'm always there,
Yeah.
that pleasant
So what
person.
would you like to see?
Sure, they love it.
I've heard that I've actually heard that a lot of town planning officials are usually pretty pro tiny houses, but they also have to enforce the laws that are currently written.
Yes. So it's been two very different experiences working at the state level and working at the local level.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
wildly different. At the state level,
How so?
there's so you're so disconnected from it, and no matter how hard you like try to push in, it's like they
Hmm.
they don't they say they want you there, but they don't really want you there.
Hmm. Hmm.
Whereas when I go to the meetings in Holyoke, I feel like they do appreciate when I, speak during public hearings. They are happy to have constituents there and get feedback from them. And, I often have to stay till the end for them to get to tiny houses.
Yeah.
And I hear them, going it's the planning board, so they're reviewing permits and they're working
Hmm.
with people and they really, really, really do, like, try to get people's projects, like, across the finish line. Like, they're
Yeah.
really not there to be like, "No, we just don't want that." They really do,
Right.
like, and a lot of their feedback is really, really quality. When I think of, like, a if I'm working on something and I want somebody to look at it and edit it and come up with improvements, it feels more like that editing
Mhm.
process than it does this, like, yellow caution tape wall of bureaucracy. And it's actually pretty pleasant to be in their meetings.
Yeah.
But at the state level, it's not like that.
Mm.
They listen and they're like, "Okay, great, thanks." They don't have any, like, you know,
Uh,
and you don't talk to the legislator, you talk to their secretary, or I don't know,
right, right,
and their meetings are and that's the other thing, their meetings are scheduled during the day. When can I go there? I
right,
cannot go there. I can't,
right,
I'm like,
right,
but the planning board meetings are when people could go. They're in the evening.
right. Leave the evening.
Yeah. So, it's definitely been a very different experience.
Interesting. So where are things out at with the movable tiny house bill S897? Because I think it's been a little while. I think we had Vera on the show maybe 6 months ago or so. Have there been any
Yeah, so it
updates?
has moved into the Ways and Means Committee. So
Okay.
the way things work there is bills will be filed, and then they will
Okay.
be reviewed by almost like a topical kind of committee.
Okay.
So ours was obviously reviewed by the Housing Committee,
Yeah.
and the Housing Committee reported favorably on our bill.
Okay.
And now it is in the Ways and Means Committee, which is my understanding of it is that the Ways and Means Committee sort of decides the, like, logistics and feasibility of actual implementation and execution of such a bill.
Yeah.
And at any committee, they can change things. So whatever the ways and my understanding is that there have been no language changes up until this point to our original bill,
Okay.
but the Ways and Means Committee could make changes, and they could combine it with another bill. They could delete
Hmm.
things. They could not report it favorably. There's all kinds of possible outcomes, and we're sort of kept in the dark.
Yeah.
We don't get continual updates. So we just have to kind of cross our fingers and hope and pray and see what happens. And we are advocating continually. We do meet with people who are on the Ways and Means Committee and talk about tiny houses. And we are doing
Yeah.
Affordable Housing Massachusetts is having an event. I I can't go to the school, but we will have representation there. I believe Vera's going.
Nice.
So things are still happening on our end, but it's really not don't really have a lot of clarity, about what the
Yeah.
status of things is while it's in the Ways and Means Committee.
Yeah. Well, I guess, I wanted, and if somebody listening is curious about that bill, I would, definitely recommend my interview with Vera Struck. It's episode 283. So you can go to thetinyhouse.net/283 and find that. We go through the mechanics of what the bill does and what it means. And it's a pretty innovative way of legalizing tiny houses. But I guess what I want to kind of talk, about now is just, I think that a lot of people were maybe expecting to hear a happy ending to this story, you know, and, it's not like a sad ending, but it's certainly not resolved.
No,
And
it's not.
I'm curious, based on your experience, you know, what advice would you give to somebody in your position, 3 years ago, like, would you have done, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently to, maybe avoid the situation that you're in, or maybe you wouldn't do anything differently?
I honestly don't think that I would have done anything differently.
Hmm.
I know myself, and I know, like, my stubbornness
Hmm.
and my natural tendency to sort of buck authority.
Yeah.
And I know that I wouldn't have done. I'm like, I want a tiny house and I want it now, and nobody is going to stop me or tell me otherwise and tell me I can't have one or live in it. And so I really honestly think I probably would have made all the same choices. And I'm really happy, I love that, I love my boyfriend. I love living with him. It's definitely not what I envisioned at where this would go.
Yeah.
But it's also not, I don't see it as the end of the story either. That house is going to get done.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care how, but it will get done. I will finish building it. And and it will be, I don't know what that will look like when it is done. Maybe it will move into his backyard.
Yeah.
Maybe it will be a very overpriced, oversized walk-in closet. But it will be something that I can say, I built that, and I had somebody build the shell, but it was my plan, and I did a lot of the work. I put exterior insulation on it, put the siding on it, did the floor.
Wow.
And all the inside will be me. All of the trades will be me. So
wow.
I'll be able to, even though it's not done, I look at it and I'm proud of myself. And that in and of itself is like a pretty big deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the whole experience has not really just changed how I feel about tiny living, but it's also changed how I feel about education. Through some of this process, really? I was, without a better word for it, homeless. I slept in a tent for a few months. I couch surfed for a few months. And, a lot of my students undergo similar life situations. And, I love biology. I love environmental science. I think it's all super important. But, I also go to committee meetings. And for those of your listeners who are not in Massachusetts, we have a standardized test called the MCAS. And, I go to MCAS meetings where we vet MCAS questions, and I hear things like, should we really be taking out vocabulary? And I think to myself, like, well, are quadruple syllable words really important in life? I don't know. I think biology and environmental science is super important. I think everybody should know it, but I definitely also question, whether it's the most important thing. And or if there are things that we could be doing better in the education system to, I hear from kids all the time, like, I don't want to do this. This isn't like where I want to be. And I'm like, I get it. I feel like I'm so overrun with empathy that I'm not as effective anymore.
Wow.
But maybe that is, leading to a different chapter where now that my eyes have been open to different issues, maybe I can make some changes later.
Got it.
And maybe that's all coming out after I finish the house. But
nice.
I really have learned that there really is no beginning and no end to the journey that we call life. It all just sort of is just lesson after lesson after lesson, and you learn what you're ready to learn, and you take with you what you can, and you just every day is a new day and a new opportunity to do something.
I love that. Even
if it's just putting up one board. Sometimes it was all, I was like, I have 20 minutes, but I have to do something, and I'll put up the board.
That's awesome. Well, good for you. I mean, I really want to follow your progress and just see as things take shape, and you shared so many great pictures of the progress of the house. So I'll go through those, and, people listening, this is going to be episode 299. So thetinyhouse.net/299 will get you to the show notes page for this episode, where you'll find all the pictures of both tiny houses and a transcript and links and all those things.
Yes. And the little one is still for sale.
Okay, so the little one is for sale.
Yeah, the little one is still for
is there
sale.
like a website or somewhere where people can find out more about it?
It is posted on Tiny House Listing.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I will link to that as well. So if anybody is looking for a tiny house, it sounds like there's one for sale. Kaylee, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. I really enjoyed meeting you, and I wish you the best.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much to Kaylee for being a guest on the show today. You can find the show notes for this episode, including a complete transcript, links, and lots of photos at thetinyhouse.net/299. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/299. If you enjoyed today's conversation and found the insights valuable, don't forget to follow Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Also, if this episode resonated with you, please consider sharing it with friends or on social media. It helps bring more attention to the important topics we discuss here, and you never know whose life you might impact. Well, that's all for this week. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast.